In 1999, in the wake of the Columbine shooting, Marilyn Manson faced major controversy and backlash when people began to blame Manson and his music for the actions of the shooters.
Some will be so brash to ask if we believe that all who hear Manson tomorrow night will go out and commit violent acts. The answer is no. But does everybody who watches a Lexus ad go and buy a Lexus? No, but a few do.
In response to the controversy, Marilyn Manson wrote a piece for Rolling Stone and addressed the controversy in many interviews.
Well, they needed some sort of scapegoat because it was something that was so shocking to America and the rest of the world at the time that they needed an explanation of why, and I seemed like an easy person to blame for it.
This concept of scapegoating is one of the main issues that Gus Van Sant confronts in Elephant, a film that is based on the events of the Columbine shooting. Elephant gives the audience many small things that could potentially explain why the shooters did what they did. For instance, one scene shows one of the shooters getting bullied by classmates, and another shows the shooters playing a violent video game. Van Sant sees the title Elephant as a reference to a proverb.
There are so many different ways to look at it, and the proverb of the blind man touching the elephant, one thinks it's a wall, one thinks it's a tree, it has the leg, one thinks it's a snake because it has hold of the tail.
Yeah, right.
What can be taken from these examples is that framing can help people try to understand that which is unfathomably horrendous or brutal. To gain a deeper understanding of the concept of framing in this context, we should look at murderer and grave robber Ed Gein. Ed Gein was the youngest of 2 children, and at a young age, his father died, leaving him and his brother to be raised by their abusive mother Augusta. Augusta was obsessed with misogynistic ideologies from the Bible's Old Testament and would constantly preach of the evils of lust. When her sons were children, Augusta would sabotage her children's friendships to isolate them on the farmstead, where she was their only company. And even when they were adults, she forbid them from dating because she believed that it would send her children to hell.
And what is at bottom the story of a boy and his mother.
Ed Gein's mother repressed his sexuality, and he felt overwhelming love and loathing for her. Gein's murders were basic shootings, but he gutted one of his victims as a hunter would gut a deer, and he would use the corpses of his victims, as well as the corpses he robbed from graves, to create home decorations. Gein would also turn their skin into suits and their faces into masks that he would wear around the house. Gein's violent actions during the 1950s were so new and incomprehensible that he inspired multiple horror film killers. 2 of them will be studied here. One of them being Norman Bates from Alfred Hitchcock's 1960 movie Psycho, and the other being Leatherface from Tobe Hooper's 1974 film The Texas Chainsaw Massacre. When people frame Gein to create monsters, they are committing a similar framing act to the one that frequently occurred in the reaction to Columbine. It is a way to make sense of the horror. With Columbine, it was all about children. It was about how to protect your children, and what was going to corrupt your children. But when it came to Ed Gein and the films that were based after him, the framing had much more to do with the family, and more specifically, the impossible family. In George Lakoff's book, Don't Think of an Elephant, he talks about the very oppressive and conservative concept of the strict father model, which is best described when he says, "The world is a dangerous place and it always will be. Children are born bad in the sense that they want to do what feels good, not what is right. Therefore, they have to be made good. What is needed in this kind of a world is a strong, strict father who can protect the family in the dangerous world, support the family in the difficult world, and teach his children right from wrong. What is required of the children is obedience, because the strict father is a moral authority who knows right from wrong." This is seen in Psycho because Norma Bates takes the role of the father in the strict father model just like Augusta Gein did. In doing this, Norma breaks Norman in a way that people believed that Augusta broke Ed. This represents a fear of women stepping outside of the role of the mother. Ed Gein belonged to a highly dysfunctional family, but his family members did not partake in or condone his obsession with the dead. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre decides to make a distinct choice and alter reality to turn the whole family into Ed Gein. This represents a fear of the primal family, a concept that is described by psychoanalyst Sigmund Freud. Freud best explains this concept of the primitive when he says, "In fact, primitive man was better off in knowing no restrictions of instinct. Civilized man has exchanged a portion of his possibilities of happiness for a portion of security." The Texas Chainsaw Massacre represents a fear of escaping the modern family and returning to the primal. In the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Leatherface and his family have decided to reject social norms and embrace primitive instinct.
She had to raise me all by herself after my father died. I was only 5, and it must have been quite a strain for her.
Norma and Norman act as a framing of Ed Gein and Augusta that clearly implies that Ed Gein was a monster because his mother had to complete the impossible task of taking the role of the strict father. Discipline is an important part of the strict father model because the model involves the concept that discipline creates good children while a lack of discipline creates bad children. Norma is defined by her disciplinary actions towards Norman.
You understand, boy? Go on, go tell her she'll not be appeasing her ugly appetite with my food, or my son. Or do I have to tell her because you don't have the guts? Huh, boy? You have the guts, boy?
Shut up! Shut up!
However, despite frequently and intensely enforcing discipline, she still fails to make Norman good. Norma could not perform the 3 acts of the strict father. Norman's failures in these categories becomes clearer when looking at the discussion that Norman and Marion have over dinner.
I think that we're all in our private traps, clamped in them, and none of us can ever get out. We scratch and claw, but only at the air, only at each other. And for all of it, we never budge an inch.
Norman is trapped in many ways. One is that he is trapped in a dangerous world and has had to become a part of the danger because the mother could not protect him from it. Second, Norman is trapped because Norma could not support him in the difficult world because of her breakdowns.
A few years ago, Mother met this man, and he talked her into building this motel. He could have talked her into anything. And when he died too, it was just too great a shock for her.
Because Norma could not emotionally or mentally support Norman or herself, Norman never learned how to support himself. This leads to Norman being dependent on, and therefore trapped by, his deceased mother and his childhood home, which is evident in his inability to leave either behind.
Why don't you go away?
To a private island like you?
No, not like me.
I couldn't do that.
The final act of the strict father model that Norma failed was being able to teach the child right from wrong. We see this failure in the murders. The cover-ups, and the voyeurism. Norma's failures to provide these actions of the strict father turns Norman into the monster that he is. Norma and Norman's relationship directly parallels the relationship between Ed and Augusta Gein. Psycho uses Norman to frame Gein's monstrous qualities, and by focusing on Norman's mother taking the role of the father, Psycho defines Gein and his evil actions as the result of the mother not being able to act as the strict father.
Just what did Mother do today?
Playing into oppressive gender roles, Psycho frames Gein in a way that indirectly declares that Augusta was at fault for her son's actions because she did not strictly adhere to her role as the mother. The nuclear family is an example of a structure where people obtain security by giving up the ability to follow primal instinctual urges. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre shows what it would look like if the nuclear family,
well, the dinner date has begun, and they're all happy about it,
was exchanged for a primal family. The film frames Gein as a man of pure primal aggression who lets his violent desires run rampant and unchecked. In High Theory, Low Culture, Makita Brotman synthesizes a concept that Freud presented in his essay Beyond the Pleasure Principle. Humans are not gentle, but creatures among whose intellectual endowments is to be reckoned a powerful sense of aggression. The family in the Texas Chainsaw Massacre embraces this inherent sense of aggression, and they push themselves to bring their aggression to the most extreme levels possible. This is evident because unlike animal predators, the family does not just eat their prey. In addition to eating their victims, they turn them into lampshades and other decorations in an act of aggressive dominance. These acts are a direct reference to Gein because he also used human corpses to make household items and decorations. The character of Leatherface contains even more direct references to Gein because both wore their victims' faces as masks, and they both treated human corpses like a hunter would treat an animal carcass.
There was Bernice Warden, hanging from the rafters, upside down with her head off and gutted like a deer.
The Texas Chainsaw Massacre frames Gein as a being of pure aggression by taking Gein's most aggressive actions and attributing them to Leatherface. The film defines Gein through its framing of Leatherface, and they ultimately define Gein as a man that is nothing more than unchecked primal aggression. When attributing some of these aggressive acts to Leatherface's family as well, we can see a frame of the aggressive primal family.
We ain't in no hurry. You ain't going no place.
Overall, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre frames the actions of Gein in a way that serves as a lesson that we should never stray from the safety of the civilized family.
That's mighty good. But what's better, Tommy knows he's a real member of his family team.
Initially, it may seem difficult to see how Elephant, Psycho, and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre are connected. However, after discussing all three of these films, it is hopefully easy to see that all of these films revolve around the fact that unthinkable tragedies serve as non-signifiers, real-life Rorschach plots. As Marilyn Manson suggested, people need a scapegoat, and what somebody chooses as the scapegoat can reveal a lot about personal interpretation, culture, and societal fears.